My grandson stole my house while I was in the hospital recovering from a stroke, and he did it with my own signature. I found out 3 weeks later when the eviction notice arrived at my door. 22 years. That's how long I spent raising someone else's child after my daughter decided motherhood interfered with her lifestyle. 22 years of packed lunches, parent-teacher conferences, and birthday parties on a fixed income. 22 years of being called grandma when I should have been enjoying retirement. 22 years of sacrifice that ended with a lawyer's letterhead and my own grandson's name listed as the new property owner. The stroke hit me on a Tuesday morning in September. I remember because I was making cornbread for the church potluck that evening, and the smell of butter melting in the cast-iron skillet is the last clear memory I have before everything went sideways. One moment I was standing at the stove, humming along to the gospel station on the radio. The next moment, my left hand wouldn't grip the spatula anymore, and the room tilted like I was on a ship in rough waters. The skillet hit the floor with a crash that brought my neighbor Miss Geneva running through the unlocked back door. She found me collapsed against the kitchen counter, trying to form words that came out as nothing but slurred sounds, like my tongue had forgotten how to work. The butter was spreading across the linoleum in a golden pool, and all I could think was how I'd never get that stain out. The ambulance ride is mostly blank in my memory. Flashes of fluorescent lights overhead, the tight grip of a blood pressure cuff on my arm, someone asking me questions I couldn't answer. When I finally came back to myself enough to understand what was happening, I was in a hospital bed with tubes in my arm and my grandson Marcus sitting in the chair by the window. He looked concerned, his dark eyes fixed on me with what I thought was worry. His hands were clasped together like he'd been praying, and when he saw my eyes focus on him, he stood up quickly and came to my bedside. "Grandma Dorothy, thank God you're awake. You scared me half to death. The doctors say you had a stroke, but they caught it early. You're going to be okay." My mouth felt like it was full of cotton, and my words came out slow and thick. "How long have I been here?" 2 days. "I've been here the whole time. I called your job and let them know what happened. I called the church, too. Pastor Williams said everyone's praying for you." I tried to nod, but even that small movement made my head swim. The room was too bright, the beeping of monitors too loud, and I felt so tired, like I could sleep for 100 years. Marcus pulled the chair closer and sat down, reaching for my good hand, the right one that still worked properly. "Don't worry about anything at home, Grandma. I've got it all handled." I went by the house and cleaned up the kitchen, threw out the ruined food, mopped the floor. Everything's locked up tight. Relief washed over me, warm and sweet as summer rain. This was the boy I'd raised, the young man I'd worked double shifts at the nursing home to put through community college, the grandson who used to draw me pictures in crayon and leave them on the refrigerator with alphabet magnets. "Thank you, baby," I whispered, squeezing his hand with what little strength I had. "I don't know what I'd do without you. You don't have to worry about that. You've taken care of me my whole life. Now it's my turn to take care of you." He smiled, and it looked genuine, warm and reassuring, like sunshine breaking through clouds. That's when he pulled out the manila folder. "The neurologist came by earlier while you were sleeping. He said you're going to need some time to recover. Physical therapy, maybe speech therapy. It could be weeks before you're back to normal." My heart sank. Weeks meant missing work. Missing work meant missing paychecks. Missing paychecks meant the mortgage wouldn't get paid, the utilities would pile up, and everything I'd worked so hard to maintain would start crumbling. I'd been living paycheck to paycheck since I took custody of Marcus all those years ago. There was no savings account, no emergency fund, no safety net. Just me, my Social Security check, and the part-time job at the nursing home that kept the lights on. Marcus must have seen the panic in my eyes because he patted my hand gently. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. I've been thinking about your situation, and I have an idea that might help." He opened the folder and pulled out several sheets of paper covered in tiny print. Legal documents, from what I could make out through my blurred vision and foggy mind. "I talked to a lawyer friend of mine, and he suggested something that could protect you financially. See, if anything happens to you, if you need long-term care, or if the medical bills get too high, the state could put a lien on your house. They could take it to pay for your care." The fear that gripped me then was sharp and immediate, cutting through the medication haze like a knife. My house. The small 2-bedroom bungalow I'd bought 30 years ago with the life insurance money from my late husband, Thomas. The house where I'd raised my daughter, then my grandson. The house with the porch swing where I drank my morning coffee and watched the neighborhood wake up. The house with the garden out back where I grew tomatoes and collard greens every summer. The house that was my only real asset, my only security, the only thing of value I had to leave behind when I was gone. They can do that? I asked, my voice cracking with more than just the effects of the stroke. They can, and they do it all the time, but there's a way to prevent it. If you transfer the deed to a family member now, before things get worse, the house is protected. It stays in the family no matter what happens with your medical situation. He tapped the papers with his finger, and I noticed his nails were clean and neatly trimmed. When had he started taking such good care of his appearance? The Marcus I'd raised used to come home with dirt under his fingernails and grass stains on his jeans. This version of my grandson wore pressed khakis and a button-down shirt, like he'd just come from a business meeting. My head was pounding, and the effort of trying to think through what he was saying felt like pushing a boulder uphill. Transfer the deed? To who? To me, Grandma. I'm your closest family. Your daughter's been gone for years. No one knows where she is. I'm the one who's here, the one who's always been here. If you transfer the house to me now, it's protected. And don't worry, nothing changes. You'll still live there, still have your home. This is just paperwork to protect what you've worked for. It made sense, or at least it seemed to make sense through the fog of medication and fear. My daughter Angela had disappeared into her addiction years ago, showing up only when she needed money and vanishing again when I refused to enable her anymore. The last time I'd seen her was Marcus's high school graduation 6 years ago, and even then she'd been so high she could barely stand up straight during the ceremony. She wasn't going to take care of me. She'd never taken care of anyone but herself. But Marcus had been there through it all. Through his mother's abandonment, through the lean years when I worked overnight shifts and came home exhausted to help him with homework, through his teenage rebellion when he'd tested every boundary I set, through community college when he'd struggled with classes but finally earned his associate degree in business administration. He'd stayed local, gotten a job with some tech startup downtown, and visited me every Sunday for dinner. He was my boy, my family, the one person I trusted completely. I need you to sign here and initial here. He was pulling a pen from his shirt pocket, uncapping it with practiced efficiency. The lawyer said we need to do this as soon as possible, before any more medical issues come up. That way, everything's in place if you need long-term care. My right hand trembled as I took the pen from him. The pages swam in front of my eyes, the legal language dense and incomprehensible. Words like grantor and grantee and quitclaim deed blurred together. I should read this. I should call someone. I should wait until my head was clearer, until I could think straight, until I could get a second opinion. But Marcus was looking at me with those concerned eyes, and the machines were beeping, and my head was pounding, and I was so tired, so terribly, bone-deep tired. You trust me, don't you, Grandma? Of course I do, baby. You're the only family I have left. Then trust me now. I'm protecting you. I'm protecting us. The pen felt heavy in my hand, but I signed where he pointed, 3 times. My signature was shaky and barely legible, nothing like my usual careful handwriting. But it was legal, and it was done. There, he said, gathering up the papers quickly and tucking them back into the folder. That's taken care of. Now you can focus on getting better without worrying about the house. He leaned down and kissed my forehead, and I felt the warmth of his lips against my skin. Get some rest, Grandma. I'll be back tomorrow to check on you. I watched him walk out of the hospital room, the folder tucked under his arm, and I felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude that I had someone who cared enough to protect me. Gratitude that I wasn't facing this crisis alone. Gratitude that my grandson had grown into such a responsible young man. If you've ever trusted someone completely, only to have that trust used against you, you'll understand what happened next. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital recovering. The physical therapy was brutal, retraining my left side to obey my brain's commands, learning to walk without dragging my foot, learning to grip objects without dropping them, learning to speak without slurring my words. Marcus visited twice, briefly both times, always with an excuse about work being busy. But he sent flowers, a cheerful bouquet of carnations and daisies that the nurses placed on my bedside table. The card read, "Get well soon, Grandma. Love, Marcus." When they finally discharged me, Miss Geneva picked me up and drove me home. The house looked the same from the outside, the white paint slightly faded, the rose bushes by the front porch overgrown and in need of pruning. But when I walked through the front door, something felt different, off somehow, though I couldn't put my finger on exactly what had changed. Maybe it was just me, I thought. Maybe everything feels different after a stroke. Maybe the world shifts a little bit when you come that close to losing it. I settled back into my routine slowly. Physical therapy 3 times a week, speech therapy twice a week, short walks around the neighborhood to rebuild my strength. I called Marcus several times to thank him again for handling everything, but he never answered. His voicemail was always full. I left messages telling him to come by for Sunday dinner, that I was making his favorite pot roast, but he never showed up. By the 3rd Sunday of empty chairs and cooling food, I started to feel a cold knot of worry forming in my stomach. That's when the letter arrived. White envelope, certified mail, requiring my signature. I signed for it with my still shaky handwriting and carried it inside, my heart already starting to pound before I even opened it. The law office of Henderson and Associates. Official notice of eviction proceedings. Current owner of property requests immediate vacation of premises. 30 days to vacate. I read it 3 times before the words made any sense. Eviction. Owner. Vacate. But I owned this house. I'd owned it for 30 years. There had to be some mistake, some clerical error, some confusion with addresses or names. I called the number on the letterhead, my fingers fumbling with the phone buttons. The receptionist who answered was professionally polite but firm. Yes, Mrs. Williams, the eviction notice is correct. The property at 1247 Maple Street was transferred to Marcus Williams 3 weeks ago. He is now the legal owner and has requested that you vacate within 30 days. No, that's not right. He was protecting the house for me. That was just paperwork for protection. Ma'am, I don't know what you were told, but according to the deed filed with the county, you signed the property over completely. You no longer have any legal ownership. Mr. Williams is the sole owner, and he has every right to request that you leave. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the kitchen table. The same kitchen table where Marcus had eaten breakfast before school for 15 years. The same kitchen table where I'd helped him with algebra homework and college applications. The same kitchen table where we'd celebrated his graduation with a homemade cake because I couldn't afford to take him out to a fancy restaurant. He'd stolen my house. While I was lying in a hospital bed recovering from a stroke, barely able to speak or think straight, he'd tricked me into signing away the only thing of value I owned. And now, he wanted me gone. 30 days to pack up 30 years of memories and leave. 30 days to find somewhere else to live on a fixed income with medical bills piling up. 30 days before I became homeless at 70 years old. I tried calling Marcus again. This time, he answered on the 3rd ring. His voice was casual, almost cheerful. Hey, Grandma. What's up? What's up? What's up? I got an eviction notice, Marcus, from your lawyer, saying I have 30 days to leave my own house. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then he sighed, like I was a child who just didn't understand basic math. It's not your house anymore, Grandma. It's mine. You signed it over to me, remember? For protection, you said. To keep it in the family. That's exactly what I'm doing. Keeping it in the family. My family. I'm getting married next month, and my fiancé and I need the house. Married? I didn't even know he was seeing anyone seriously. But you said nothing would change. You said I could still live here. I said a lot of things. He laughed, actually laughed, and the sound of it made my blood run cold. Look, I need you to be realistic here. That house is worth almost $400,000 now. The neighborhood's been gentrifying. Developers are buying up properties all over the place. I could sell it tomorrow and pay off my student loans, my car, everything. But I'm being generous. I'm keeping it so my fiancé and I have a place to start our life together. But where am I supposed to go? That's not really my problem, is it? You're collecting Social Security. You can get an apartment somewhere. There are senior living facilities that take people with limited income. You'll figure something out. You raised me to be resourceful, remember? Marcus, please. I raised you. I gave up everything to take care of you when your mother couldn't, and I appreciate that. I really do. But it's time for me to think about my future now. You had your time living in that house. Now it's my turn. The line went dead. He'd hung up on me. My grandson, the boy I'd raised from age 6 when his mother dropped him off at my door and disappeared. The child I'd fed and clothed and loved with everything I had. The young man I'd sacrificed my retirement savings to educate. He'd stolen my house, and now he was throwing me away like garbage that had outlived its usefulness. I sat at that kitchen table for hours, the eviction notice spread out in front of me, and I realized something that made my blood run cold. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was planned. The concerned grandson routine in the hospital, the perfectly timed legal papers, the pressure to sign quickly before I could think straight. He'd been waiting for an opportunity, and my stroke had given it to him. While I was fighting to relearn how to walk and talk, he was stealing my home right out from under me. And he'd done it with my own shaky signature on documents I couldn't even read properly. The boy I'd raised had become someone I didn't recognize, and I had 30 days to figure out what to do about it before I ended up on the street. The first person I called was Miss Geneva. She came over within 15 minutes, still wearing her church clothes from Wednesday evening service, smelling of the rose-water perfume she'd worn for as long as I'd known her. She sat across from me at that kitchen table and read through the eviction notice with her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, her lips pressed into a thin line that got tighter with every word. When she finally looked up at me, there were tears in her eyes that matched my own. That boy ought to be ashamed of himself, after everything you did for him. Dorothy, this is elder abuse, plain and simple. We need to call the police. But what can the police do? I signed the papers. I gave him the house. You were recovering from a stroke. You weren't in your right mind. Any decent lawyer could argue you were coerced, that you didn't understand what you were signing. She reached across the table and gripped my hand with her strong fingers, the ones that had kneaded bread dough and washed dishes and held mine through countless crises over the 40 years we'd been neighbors. We're going to fight this, Dorothy. We're not letting that ungrateful boy steal your home. The legal aid office was in a strip mall on the east side of town, wedged between a nail salon and a check-cashing place. The waiting room smelled like burnt coffee and desperation, filled with people who looked like they were carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. I sat there for 2 hours before a young lawyer named Jennifer Chen called my name. She couldn't have been more than 30, with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She listened to my story without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, her expression growing more serious with each detail I shared. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and removed her glasses to rub her eyes. Mrs. Williams, I'm going to be honest with you. This is going to be very difficult to fight. You signed a quitclaim deed. That's a legal transfer of property. The burden of proof is on you to show that you were mentally incompetent at the time of signing, or that you were under duress. But I just had a stroke. I could barely think straight. I understand, and I believe you. But proving that in court is another matter entirely. You were conscious, you signed the papers yourself, and there were presumably witnesses at the hospital who could testify that you were lucid enough to communicate. Unless your grandson threatened you or physically forced you to sign, it's going to be hard to prove coercion. The hope that had been building in my chest deflated like a punctured balloon. So there's nothing I can do? I didn't say that. We can file a motion to set aside the deed based on undue influence. Your grandson had a position of trust. He was your caretaker in that moment, and he used that position to manipulate you into signing away your property. That's a form of elder abuse, and judges don't look kindly on it. But I need you to understand that this will take time. Months, possibly longer. And there's no guarantee we'll win. I don't have months. I have 30 days before he evicts me. We can file for an emergency injunction to stop the eviction proceedings while the case is being heard. That might buy you some time. But Mrs. Williams, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that you might lose this house. Your grandson is the legal owner right now, and overturning that is going to be an uphill battle. She leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. Do you have anywhere else you can stay? Any other family or friends who could take you in temporarily? My daughter's been gone for years. Marcus is my only family. Miss Geneva next door has already offered me her spare room, but she's on a fixed income too. I can't burden her long term. What about senior housing? There are subsidized apartments for people in your situation. I can give you some referrals. Subsidized housing meant giving up, meant accepting that Marcus had won, that I was really going to lose everything. But what choice did I have? The walls of that small office felt like they were closing in on me, the fluorescent lights too bright, the air too thin. I'll take whatever help you can give me. Jennifer Chen filed the paperwork that afternoon. Emergency injunction to halt eviction proceedings, motion to set aside the deed transfer, petition for investigation of elder abuse. The legal terms swam together in my mind like alphabet soup, but I signed everything she put in front of me, hoping that somehow, some way, justice would prevail. The injunction hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out. Until then, I was in limbo, living in a house that was legally no longer mine, waiting to see if a judge would give me a chance to fight back. Marcus's response came 3 days later. Not a phone call or a visit, but another letter from his lawyer. This one was meaner, more aggressive. Frivolous lawsuit, wasting court resources. If Mrs. Williams persists with this legal action, we will countersue for harassment and seek to recover legal fees. The message was clear. Back off or face consequences I couldn't afford. Miss Geneva found me crying at the kitchen table when she came by with a casserole that evening. She set the dish down, wrapped her arms around me, and let me sob into her shoulder like a child. That's when she told me something that changed everything. "Dorothy, I need to tell you something. I should have mentioned it sooner, but I wasn't sure if it was my place. About 2 months before your stroke, I saw Marcus at the house with a woman. I thought maybe it was a girlfriend, but something about the way they were acting seemed off. They were walking around the property, pointing at things, taking pictures. At one point, I heard them talking about renovations and resale value. I heard the woman say something about how much the place would be worth once it was fixed up. My blood went cold. 2 months before the stroke. He'd been planning this for at least 2 months, maybe longer. Scoping out the property value, probably getting appraisals, making plans for what he'd do with my house once he found a way to take it. The stroke hadn't been an opportunity that fell into his lap. It had been the excuse he'd been waiting for. Do you remember what the woman looked like? Early 30s, blonde hair, expensive-looking clothes. She was driving a silver BMW. I remember thinking Marcus must be dating someone with money. That was his fiancée, the woman he was marrying, the woman he needed my house for. Except she already had money, which meant they didn't need my house because they couldn't afford anything else. They wanted it because it was valuable, because the neighborhood was gentrifying, because they saw an asset they could acquire for free if they played their cards right. I felt sick. Actually physically ill, my stomach churning with a nausea that had nothing to do with my medication. Can you testify to this? At the hearing? Tell the judge what you saw? Of course I will. And Dorothy, there's something else. I've been asking around the neighborhood, talking to people quietly. You know how I do. Turns out Marcus has been telling people for months that you were getting senile, that you were forgetting things, that he was worried about your mental state. Mrs. Patterson from the corner house told me he stopped by last spring, asking if she'd noticed you acting confused. Mr. Chen at the grocery store said Marcus asked him the same thing. He was building a narrative, creating a paper trail of witnesses who would say I was mentally incompetent. That way, if anyone questioned why a grandmother would sign over her house to her grandson, he'd have people ready to say I wasn't in my right mind. It was calculated, methodical, evil in its precision. The boy I'd raised, the child I'd loved, had been systematically destroying my reputation in preparation for stealing everything I owned. How long had he been planning this? How many nights had he sat at my dinner table, eating my food, accepting my love, while plotting to take my home? If any of you watching this have elderly parents or grandparents, please pay attention to what I'm about to say. Check in on them. Not just with phone calls or occasional visits, but really check in. Look at their finances. Know who has access to their accounts and their property. Ask questions if something seems off. Because predators don't always come from outside the family. Sometimes they're already sitting at your dinner table. The hearing arrived on a gray October morning, the kind where the sky is one solid sheet of clouds and the air smells like coming rain. Jennifer Chen met me at the courthouse steps, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a navy suit that made her look more authoritative than she had in her small office. She'd subpoenaed Miss Geneva, collected affidavits from neighbors, and somehow tracked down my medical records from the hospital showing the medications I'd been on when I signed the deed. "We have a good case, Mrs. Williams. Judge Morrison is known for being sympathetic to elder abuse cases. Just tell the truth about what happened and let me handle the legal arguments." The courtroom was smaller than I expected from watching television dramas. Dark wood paneling, fluorescent lights, an American flag in the corner. Marcus was already there with his lawyer, a man in an expensive suit who looked like he cost more per hour than I made in a week. Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes. He sat there studying his phone like it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen, his jaw tight, his shoulders rigid. Judge Morrison was a black woman in her 50s, with silver streaks in her hair and the kind of face that had seen every type of human behavior and stopped being surprised by any of it. She read through the case file in silence, while we all sat there waiting, the only sound the clock ticking on the wall and the rustle of papers. When she finally looked up, her eyes found mine first, then moved to Marcus. Her expression gave nothing away. "Ms. Chen, you may present your case." Jennifer stood and laid out the facts with the precision of a surgeon. Elderly woman recovering from a stroke, grandson with power of influence, legal documents presented at a hospital bedside while the plaintiff was medicated and impaired, property transfer executed within 48 hours of a major medical crisis, pattern of behavior suggesting premeditation. She called Miss Geneva to the stand first. My neighbor testified about seeing Marcus and his fiancée examining the property months before my stroke, about the conversations where Marcus had questioned my mental competence, about finding me distraught after receiving the eviction notice. Then Jennifer called me. I walked to the witness stand on legs that trembled despite the physical therapy, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The truth was all I had left. She asked me to describe what happened in the hospital. I told the judge about the confusion, the medications, the fear about losing my home to medical bills. I told her about trusting my grandson because he was my family, because I'd raised him, because I had no one else. I told her about the eviction notice arriving while I was still doing physical therapy, about the phone call where Marcus laughed at me, about realizing I'd been manipulated at my most vulnerable moment. When Jennifer finished her questions, Marcus's lawyer stood up. He was a shark in human form, smooth and predatory. "Mrs. Williams, you signed the deed willingly, did you not?" "I signed it because I was told it would protect my house, but you signed it willingly. No one forced your hand to hold the pen. No one threatened you. I was recovering from a stroke. I could barely think, but you could think clearly enough to sign your name 3 times in the correct locations. You could think clearly enough to understand that you were signing a legal document. You could think clearly enough to trust your grandson with your property. He was twisting everything, making my trust sound like consent, making my vulnerability sound like competence. Isn't it true, Mrs. Williams, that you've had memory problems for the past year? That you've forgotten appointments, misplaced important documents, struggled to manage your finances? That's not true. I've been fine." "Really?" "Because I have affidavits here from 3 neighbors stating that your grandson expressed concern about your declining mental state months before your stroke, that he was worried about your ability to live independently." "Those are lies." My voice cracked, and I hated how weak I sounded. "He told them to say that. He was building a case against me. You're suggesting that your grandson orchestrated an elaborate conspiracy to steal your house. Does that seem more likely than the possibility that you, a 70-year-old woman recovering from a stroke, simply made a decision you now regret?" Before I could answer, Judge Morrison interrupted. "That's enough, counselor. I've heard what I need to hear." She turned to Marcus. "Young man, stand up." Marcus stood slowly, his face carefully neutral. "I want you to look at your grandmother and explain to me why she should lose her home." The lawyer started to object, but the judge held up her hand. "I'm not asking you as a lawyer. I'm asking you as her grandson. Why does she deserve to be homeless?" Marcus's jaw worked for a moment before he spoke. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this isn't about what she deserves. It's about property rights. The house was legally transferred to me. My grandmother signed the deed. What I choose to do with my property is my decision." "Your property," Judge Morrison repeated, her voice flat. "The house your grandmother bought with her late husband's life insurance. The house where she raised your mother, then raised you. The house she's lived in for 30 years. That property. Yes, Your Honor. And you need it because I'm getting married. My fiancé and I need a place to live. You need it or you want it. Your Honor, I don't see the distinction." The judge leaned back in her chair and studied Marcus like he was a specimen under a microscope. "Let me make the distinction clear for you, young man. Needing something means you have no other options. Wanting something means you've decided that your desires outweigh someone else's welfare. Which category does your grandmother's eviction fall into?" The courtroom was silent. Marcus's lawyer was trying to signal him to stop talking, but Marcus's pride wouldn't let him back down. We want to start our life together in a nice house in a good neighborhood. Your grandmother's house meets those criteria. Yes. And the fact that acquiring this house means your grandmother, who raised you, becomes homeless in her 70s, doesn't factor into your wants? Your Honor, she can find somewhere else to live. There are senior housing options. She'll figure it out. Judge Morrison's expression hardened into something that made me think of carved stone, beautiful and immovable. I've been on this bench for 23 years. I've seen a lot of ugliness in that time. People at their worst, families destroying each other over money and property and pride. But I don't think I've ever seen someone sit in my courtroom and so casually dismiss the well-being of the person who sacrificed everything to raise them. She turned to Jennifer. Ms. Chen, your emergency injunction is granted. Mr. Marcus Williams, you are prohibited from evicting your grandmother or selling the property until this case is fully adjudicated. Furthermore, I'm ordering a full investigation into the circumstances of this deed transfer. If I find evidence of elder abuse or undue influence, I will not only set aside this deed, I will refer this case for criminal prosecution. Marcus's face went pale. Your Honor, that's not necessary. Sit down, Mr. Williams. The judge's voice cracked like a whip. I wasn't finished. You will also be responsible for paying your grandmother's legal fees related to this case. And if I discover that you've harassed her, threatened her, or interfered with her in any way during these proceedings, I will hold you in contempt of court. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Your Honor, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. The lawyer was frantically whispering in his ear, but Marcus just stood there, his face a mask of shock and anger. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He'd been so confident, so certain that the law was on his side. Court adjourned. Judge Morrison banged her gavel and swept out of the courtroom. Jennifer turned to me with tears in her eyes. We did it, Mrs. Williams. You get to stay in your house. For now. But the relief I felt was complicated, tangled up with grief and anger and betrayal. Yes, I got to stay in my house, but I'd lost my grandson. The boy I'd raised, the child I'd loved, was gone. In his place was a stranger who'd looked a judge in the eye and said his grandmother's homelessness was an acceptable price for his wants. Miss Geneva hugged me in the courthouse hallway. That judge gave him what he deserved. But as I watched Marcus leave with his lawyer, his phone already pressed to his ear, probably calling his fiancée with the bad news, I realized something that made my heart ache even more than the betrayal. He still didn't understand what he'd done wrong. He genuinely believed he was entitled to my house, that his wants mattered more than my needs, that the sacrifices I'd made raising him had somehow purchased his right to take whatever he wanted from me. The investigation that Judge Morrison ordered took 3 months. During that time, Marcus didn't call, didn't visit, didn't acknowledge my existence, except through his lawyer's terse responses to court filings. His fiancée broke up with him when she realized the house wasn't going to be an easy acquisition. I heard through Miss Geneva's gossip network that she told him she wasn't interested in starting a marriage mired in legal battles with his family. Good riddance to both of them, Miss Geneva had said, but I just felt empty. The investigator discovered that Marcus had taken out a loan against the property 2 weeks after I signed the deed. He'd already borrowed $100,000 using my house as collateral, money he'd spent on an engagement ring, a new car, and a deposit on a wedding venue. He'd been so confident that the house was his that he'd started spending its value before the eviction was even finalized. When the investigator presented this evidence to Judge Morrison, her decision was swift and absolute. The deed transfer was void. The property reverted to me. Marcus was ordered to pay back the legal fees, plus the cost of the investigation, plus damages for emotional distress. But here's what no one tells you about winning. Sometimes victory feels hollow. I got my house back. Yes, the deed is in my name again. The eviction notice is worthless paper in a trash can. But I lost something that can't be restored by a judge's ruling. I lost the grandson I'd loved, the child I'd raised, the young man I'd been so proud of when he'd walked across that community college stage and accepted his diploma. That person doesn't exist anymore. Maybe he never did. Maybe I'd been loving a fiction all along, seeing what I wanted to see instead of what was really there. Marcus declared bankruptcy to avoid paying what he owed me. The house he'd tried to steal from me ended up costing him his credit, his fiancée, and his self-respect. But it also cost me something irreplaceable, the ability to trust, to believe that love and sacrifice create bonds that matter. I sit on my porch now in the evenings, in the swing where I used to push Marcus when he was small, and I wonder where it all went wrong. Was it something I did? Something I failed to teach him? Or was he always capable of this cruelty and I just refused to see it? The house is mine again, but it feels different now. The rooms echo with memories that hurt instead of comfort. The kitchen table where we ate breakfast together is tainted by the memory of him planning how to steal from me. The spare bedroom where he slept during his high school years is now just empty space that reminds me of how completely empty he'd become inside. They say blood is thicker than water, but sometimes blood betrays you worse than strangers ever could, because strangers never have access to your deepest vulnerabilities the way family does. I'd won my legal battle. I'd kept my home. But sitting there in the house that had almost been stolen from me, I realized that some losses can't be measured by judges or lawyers or property deeds. I'd lost the future I'd imagined, the one where my grandson visited on Sundays, where we celebrated holidays together, where eventually he'd bring his own children to visit, and I'd be Grandma Dorothy to another generation. That future was dead, killed not by time or distance, but by greed and betrayal. And as I sat there in my legally secured house, I was about to discover that Marcus's attempt to steal my home was just the beginning of how far he was willing to go. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday afternoon, 6 months after the court's final ruling. I was in the backyard tending to my tomato plants, the ones I'd replanted after missing a whole growing season due to the stroke and legal battles. The smell of earth and green growing things was therapeutic, reminding me that life continues even after devastation. That's when I noticed the for sale sign going up in the house directly behind mine. The Johnsons had lived there for 15 years, and I hadn't heard anything about them moving. By Wednesday evening, 2 more for sale signs had appeared on my street. By Friday, there were 5. Miss Geneva came over that weekend with a disturbed look on her face. "Dorothy, something strange is happening." I was at the grocery store and ran into Paula Henderson, from the Methodist Church. She said someone's been going around the neighborhood offering to buy houses. Cash offers, above market value, quick closings. At least 8 families have accepted already. My stomach twisted. Who's buying? She didn't know. Some investment company. But Dorothy, here's the strange part. The only houses they're not making offers on are yours and mine. Every other property on this block has gotten an approach, except ours. I knew. Even before I verified it, even before Miss Geneva did her detective work and discovered the name of the investment company, I knew. ML Investments, LLC, Marcus Lawrence Investments. My grandson had started a real estate company using his middle name, and he was systematically buying up every property around mine. Within 3 months, he'd acquired 12 houses on our street. The families who'd lived there, my neighbors of decades, were gone, replaced by rental properties and flip projects that Marcus was managing through his new company. The construction started in April. Demolition crews, contractors, dumpsters blocking the street. The noise began at 7 in the morning and continued until 6 at night. Hammering, sawing, beeping trucks backing up, workers shouting to each other over the din. My quiet residential street had become a construction zone. The dust was constant, coating everything. My windows, my porch, the tomato plants I'd worked so hard to nurture. When I complained to the city about the noise and disruption, I was told that all the proper permits had been filed. Everything was legal. Marcus had found a new way to force me out. If he couldn't evict me through the courts, he'd make my life so miserable that I'd leave voluntarily. The renovations went on for months. Just when one house would finish, another would begin. The pattern was clear and deliberate. He was keeping the construction rotating so that there was never a moment of peace. My blood pressure medication had to be increased because the stress was affecting my health. I wasn't sleeping more than 3 or 4 hours a night, jolted awake by nightmares or by actual construction noise that seemed to blur together after a while. Miss Geneva documented everything. Videos of the trucks blocking driveways, photos of the dust coating our properties, recordings of the noise levels that exceeded city ordinances. We filed complaint after complaint, but Marcus's lawyers were better than the city's overworked code enforcement officers. Every violation resulted in a small fine that Marcus paid without blinking, then continued doing exactly what he'd been doing before. He had money now from somewhere, and he was using it as a weapon. That's when Angela showed up, my daughter, who I hadn't seen in over 7 years, appeared at my door on a Thursday evening in June. She was thinner than I remembered, her face showing the hard years of addiction and rough living. But her eyes were clearer than they'd been the last time I saw her, and when she hugged me, I could smell soap and shampoo instead of alcohol and cigarettes. "Mama, I heard about what Marcus did to you. I came as soon as I found out. I'm so sorry. I should have been here." I wanted to be angry at her for all the years of absence, all the times she'd chosen drugs over her son, over me, over herself. But standing there looking at my daughter, older and worn but apparently sober, I just felt tired. "Where have you been, Angela?" She came inside and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd fed her as a child, where I'd later fed her son. "Rehab, prison for a while, then a halfway house. I've been clean for 18 months now, Mama. I have a job at a grocery store, a little apartment. I'm trying to put my life back together." I wanted to get stable before I reached out, but then I ran into Miss Geneva at the bus station and she told me everything Marcus did. "Why are you here now?" "To help if you'll let me, and to apologize." "Mama, I know I failed you. I failed Marcus too. I was so messed up, so selfish. I left him with you and I just disappeared into my addiction. Everything that happened, everything he became, some of that's on me." Tears were streaming down her face, and despite everything, despite all the years of disappointment and heartbreak, she was still my daughter. "No," I said firmly. "Marcus's choices are his own. You made mistakes, but he's a grown man. He chose to do what he did. He chose cruelty. That's not on you." We talked for hours that night. She told me about hitting bottom in a county jail cell, about the long, hard work of getting clean, about the guilt that ate at her every day for abandoning her son. I told her about raising Marcus, about the sacrifices and the love and the hope that it would all mean something in the end, about how that hope had turned to ash when he'd stolen my house, about how he was now trying to drive me out through psychological warfare disguised as real estate development. By the time Miss Geneva came over to check on us, we'd both cried ourselves empty and were sitting in exhausted silence, holding hands across the kitchen table. Angela stayed. She moved into the spare bedroom, the one that used to be Marcus's, and got a job at the supermarket 3 blocks away. Having her there changed something in the house. The rooms didn't echo quite so hollowly anymore. We developed a routine. I'd make breakfast while she got ready for work. She'd make dinner when she came home in the evenings. We'd sit on the porch swing together, watching the construction crews pack up for the day, and we'd talk about everything and nothing. About her recovery, about my physical therapy, about the neighbors who were gone and the ones who remained. She was there the day Marcus finally showed his face. It was a Saturday morning in August, almost a full year after the court had ruled in my favor. I was watering the front flower beds when a silver Mercedes pulled up to the curb. Marcus got out wearing designer sunglasses and clothes that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. He looked successful, polished, every inch the young entrepreneur. But there was something hollow in his expression, something desperate lurking beneath the expensive facade. "Grandma, we need to talk." I turned off the hose and straightened up, feeling the familiar ache in my left hip from the stroke. Angela had heard his voice and come to stand in the doorway, her arms crossed, her body tense. Marcus glanced at her, and his face registered shock. "Mom? What are you doing here? Protecting my mother from you." Angela's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "After what you did, you've got some nerve showing up here." Marcus's jaw tightened. "This doesn't concern you. You abandoned us years ago. You don't get to show up now and play protective daughter." "You're right," Angela said, stepping down from the porch. "I abandoned you, and that was wrong. I was a terrible mother. But you know what? Even at my worst, even when I was stealing from Mama to buy drugs, even when I was passed out in crack houses, I never tried to make her homeless. You did that sober and calculated. So yeah, maybe I don't have the right to judge you, but I'm doing it anyway." The color rose in Marcus's cheeks. He turned back to me, trying to ignore Angela. "Grandma, this has gone on long enough. I'm prepared to make you an offer. I'll buy your house. Fair market value. Cash, quick closing. You can move to one of those nice senior communities, somewhere you don't have to worry about maintenance or property taxes. Somewhere quiet, I repeated. "You mean somewhere away from all this construction you've orchestrated specifically to drive me insane." He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "The development of this neighborhood is a separate business matter. But yes, I'll admit it would be more convenient for my investments if your property was also available for renovation. You could make good money on this sale. I looked at my grandson, this stranger wearing a familiar face, and I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, exactly. Not even anger anymore. Just a deep, profound sadness for what could have been and never would be. Marcus, do you remember when you were 8 years old and you fell off your bike on this sidewalk? I pointed to the concrete path leading to the porch. You scraped your knee so badly I could see the bone. You were screaming, terrified, convinced you were going to die. I carried you inside, cleaned the wound, bandaged it, held you while you cried. Do you remember what I told you? He shifted uncomfortably. No. I said that home is where you heal. That these walls had seen every scraped knee, every broken heart, every disappointment and fear. That this house held all that love and all that pain. And that's what made it sacred. That's what made it home. I looked around at the construction sites surrounding us, at the neighborhood Marcus had systematically destroyed. You didn't just try to take my house, Marcus. You tried to take my home, my history, my place in the world. And when the courts wouldn't let you, you decided to destroy everything around it until I had no choice but to leave. That's business, Grandma. This is prime real estate. The neighborhood is gentrifying whether you like it or not. I'm just capitalizing on market forces. No, I said, my voice steady and clear. You're trying to erase me, to remove any reminder that you once were loved, that you once mattered to someone enough that they'd sacrifice everything for you. Because facing that truth, facing what you've become versus what you were raised to be, that's too painful. It's easier to drive me away than to look at what you've done. His face went pale, then flushed red. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I raised you, Marcus. I know how your mind works. I know when you're in pain, even when you hide it behind anger and expensive clothes. You're hurting because you know what you did was wrong and you can't undo it. So you're trying to finish the job. If you can't steal my house, you'll make me leave it. Either way, I'm gone and you don't have to face what you've become. If you're interested in learning how to protect yourself and your loved ones from financial exploitation, subscribe to this channel. These stories are real, and they happen every day to good people who never thought their own family would betray them. Knowledge is power, and awareness is protection. Marcus's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. So that's it? You're just going to stay here out of spite? To prove some point? To haunt me with your presence? No, I said. I'm staying here because it's my home. Because I bought this house with your grandfather's life insurance money 30 years ago. Because every room holds memories that matter to me. Because Miss Geneva is next door, and Angela is living with me now, and we're rebuilding something you tried to destroy. I'm staying because this is where I belong, and you don't get to take that away from me no matter how much money you throw at it. Angela spoke up from the porch. Marcus, walk away. Just walk away and let her live in peace. You've already lost one mother to addiction. Don't lose your grandmother to greed. We could still fix this. We could still be a family. He laughed, but it sounded broken. A family? You think there's anything left to salvage? She stole my childhood by being a junkie. He pointed at Angela. And she stole my future by refusing to let me have the house I legally owned. You both blame me, but I'm the victim here. The delusion in his voice was staggering. He genuinely believed it. Somewhere in his mind, he'd rewritten the story so thoroughly that he saw himself as wronged, as justified, as the hero fighting against an unfair system. There was no reaching someone who'd convinced themselves that stealing from their grandmother was actually a form of self-defense. I'm done talking, Marcus. I want you to leave my property, and I want you to stop the harassment, the construction, the noise, all of it, or I'll file another lawsuit for intentional infliction of emotional distress. You can't prove anything. Maybe not. But I can sure make your life expensive trying. His lawyer bills must already be substantial. How much more can you afford to spend fighting an old woman who just wants to live in her house in peace? We stood there in a silent standoff for a long moment. The street was quiet for once, the construction crews off for the weekend. Just the three of us, 3 generations of broken family, staring at each other across a gulf that seemed impossible to bridge. Finally, Marcus turned and walked back to his car. But before he got in, he looked back at me one more time. I hope you're happy, Grandma. I hope this house is worth losing me over. And that's when I said the thing I'd been holding back, the truth I'd been avoiding, because it hurt too much to face. Marcus, I didn't lose you over this house. I lost you long before that. Maybe I lost you the day your mother left you with me, and I became Mama instead of Grandma. Maybe I lost you when I worked so hard to give you everything that I never taught you the value of sacrifice. Maybe I lost you when I loved you so much I couldn't see the entitlement growing like a cancer inside you. I don't know when it happened, but you were already gone before you ever tried to steal my home. The theft was just the moment I finally saw it. He drove away without another word. Angela came down from the porch and stood beside me, and we watched his expensive car disappear around the corner. You did good, Mama. You stood up for yourself. Did I? Or did I just lose the last piece of my grandson that might have been redeemable? She put her arm around my waist and leaned her head on my shoulder. Some people can't be saved, Mama. Some people have to want to change, and he doesn't want to. He wants to justify. There's a difference. The construction continued for another 3 months, but something had changed. Maybe Marcus realized that I wasn't going to break, or maybe he'd moved on to easier targets. Either way, the intensity decreased. The projects finished one by one, and slowly, new families began moving into the renovated houses. Not all of them were wealthy gentrifiers. Some were young couples with babies, older folks downsizing, immigrants starting fresh. The neighborhood was different now, louder and more diverse, but it was coming back to life. Angela and I settled into our new normal. She celebrated 2 years of sobriety in September, and I threw her a small party with Miss Geneva and a few people from her recovery group. We planted a garden together that fall, preparing the beds for spring vegetables. On Sundays, we went to church together, sitting in the pew where I'd sat alone for so many years. She was learning to be my daughter again, and I was learning to be just her mother, instead of mother and grandmother combined. It wasn't the family I dreamed of, but it was real, and it was ours, and it was enough. I still see Marcus sometimes. His rental properties surround mine like a siege wall, and occasionally I spot his Mercedes driving slowly past the house. He never stops, never waves, never acknowledges my existence. He's a ghost haunting his own life, unable to move forward because he can't accept what he's done. I pray for him sometimes, late at night when sleep won't come. Not prayers for reconciliation or restoration, just prayers that somehow, someday, he finds peace with himself, that the anger and entitlement that drove him to such cruelty will eventually burn out and leave room for something better. But I don't wait for that day. I don't put my life on hold hoping he'll have some epiphany and come back apologizing. I learned something through all of this, something worth more than property deeds or court victories. I learned that you can't sacrifice yourself into someone else's redemption. You can't love someone into being good. All you can do is protect your own boundaries, maintain your own dignity, and let people face the consequences of their choices. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be a victim. The house is still mine. I refinanced to pay off the legal bills, and I'll probably be paying that mortgage until I die. But every payment is worth it because this is my home on my terms. The porch swing still creaks the same way it did 30 years ago. The kitchen still smells like coffee and cornbread on Sunday mornings. The garden still produces tomatoes that taste like summer sunshine. Angela and I have movie nights on Fridays, and Miss Geneva comes over for dinner every Wednesday. We've built something here that has nothing to do with Marcus and everything to do with choosing life over bitterness. I'm 71 years old now. My left side still doesn't work quite right from the stroke. I move slower than I used to, tire more easily, need help with things I used to do alone. But I'm still here in the house I bought with Thomas's life insurance money, the house where I raised 2 generations, the house that someone tried to steal but couldn't break me enough to take. Some people might say I should have taken Marcus's offer, taken the money, and moved somewhere easier. But those people don't understand that home isn't about easy. It's about belonging. It's about standing your ground when everything inside you wants to run. It's about teaching the universe that you matter, that your life has value, that you can't be erased by someone else's greed. My grandson tried to steal my house. He failed, but more importantly, he tried to steal my dignity, my sense of self, my right to exist in the space I'd claimed as mine. And that he'll never take, no matter how many properties he buys, or how much money he makes, or how many lawyers he hires. Because the most valuable thing I own isn't this house with its worn floors and leaky faucets. It's the knowledge that I fought back, that I stood up when it would have been easier to lie down, that I refused to let betrayal define the end of my story. To anyone out there facing something similar, whether it's from family or strangers, hear me when I say this. Your home matters, your boundaries matter, your dignity matters. Don't let anyone convince you that peace at any price is worth sacrificing your self-respect. Fight for what's yours, not with violence or vengeance, but with steady persistence and unwavering belief in your own worth. The legal system isn't perfect, but sometimes it works. Community support isn't always enough, but sometimes it is. Hope isn't always rewarded, but giving up guarantees defeat. I sit on my porch now in the evenings, watching the sun set over the neighborhood that Marcus tried to steal from me. Angela usually joins me after dinner, and we swing gently while the crickets start their night songs. Sometimes we talk, sometimes we just exist together in comfortable silence. The construction noise is gone, replaced by the sounds of children playing and neighbors calling to each other, and life continuing despite everything that tried to stop it. My story doesn't have a fairy tale ending. Marcus and I will probably never reconcile. The years I spent raising him are gone forever, and the relationship we had is dead. But I'm still here, still standing, still holding on to what's mine. And in the end, maybe that's victory enough. Not the triumph of revenge or the sweetness of apology, but the simple, stubborn persistence of a woman who refused to disappear just because someone wanted her gone. The house that love built is still standing, and so am I.